Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan, and we have a special guest today, Nugget, my doggy, who's the Chihuahua little poodle mix. And today we're talking about pets and happiness. So, Donovan, where would you like to begin this conversation?
I'll start with where I'm at because I'm probably the outlier, and then we can move more towards how everyone else responds.
Okay.
So I will say for me, I have not ever been much of a pet person. That doesn't mean that I'm like an explicitly anti-pet person. There are some of those that are like, I hate cats, I hate dogs, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not that, but I feel like I've been fairly neutral, but I also feel like I'm the outlier, right? Like a lot of times people are really surprised, or like some people are kind of aggressive in terms of like,
Yeah.
you don't like cats, you don't like dogs, you don't like whatever. And I'm just like, I don't say I don't like them. I just don't actively seek them out.
Mm-hmm.
So from my perspective, and this may make me sound like really emotionally closed off, but for me, like it just is like an overhead type of thing. For me, it's like a lot of responsibility and a lot of work that I don't necessarily want to commit to, but it doesn't matter because I have a cat anyway that was grandfathered in from my partnership, and she's great. So that's kind of my initial take. I'd be curious where you're at. You probably have a much more happy and positive position.
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved animals, although I described my childhood as being pet deprived because my parents were against getting like dogs and cats. So I ended up like we had goldfish. That was our pet, which, you know, we can't do much with that. So I would end up making pets out of like everything I could find in the backyard, which included crickets and frogs, lizards, and I think one time a snake. so really anything. So it wasn't until I was kind of on my own. I initially started with just fostering puppies. That was a lot of fun. I kind of wish I had kept my first foster, Zulu, but I was traveling a lot. I was planning a big move across the country, so it just wasn't good timing. But then once we moved to California in 2019, it was the following year, the pandemic year. It's like we were part of that get puppies in COVID. They're COVID pups, basically. We got our first one, Jax, who's in the other room, our bigger dog, in July of 2020. And then we got this little one. Jax was about 5 months. Nugget was about 8 months when we got him in December later that year because we felt like Jax needed a pal. And I would say that, you know, they bring us so much joy and happiness. You know, it's a learning curve initially. They can be a little more challenging, especially when they're younger, because he wasn't fully potty trained. Pee on the carpet a little bit. Now he's perfectly potty trained. And he's just a snuggle bug. So he just loves to snuggle up, which, you know, honestly, I think that's the biggest thing about dogs and probably cats. Depends on the cat and depends on the dog, obviously. Jax is not as snuggly as this one is. But I think, you know, I know that even if I'm in the saddest mood possible, like petting this little one or giving him a little snuggle or hug, always puts me in a better mood. So that's where I will begin my little love bug. I'm just gonna dote on him the whole episode.
Being so good.
He is good. No, he's very well behaved. Actually, both our dogs aren't too barky. They're pretty good boys, and yeah, they get along really well, even though one's 15 pounds and the other one's 50 pounds. But they play really well. They get along with other dogs mostly. And yeah, they're not too needy. He was a little needy initially when we first got him. Like I could have him off leash and he would just be right at my side following me everywhere. But now he's more confident of a dog and much more independent. So if he's off leash, he'll just like run away and exploit his freedom as much as possible. But yeah, he still loves us and will come back, but he is a very independent but loving, cuddly dog. Yeah.
So I'll probably be asking you a lot of questions since you have the more developed relationship, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious sort of what, I'll just talk about happiness from like a generic standpoint. Like, what do you feel like are like sort of the ups and downs, or like what does having pets add to your life that you wouldn't otherwise have?
I think what having dogs, especially, it's like, sometimes I don't necessarily like, I think for me, connecting, whether it's human or animal, it usually helps me when I'm in a kind of depressed state or feeling a little blue. But sometimes I'm like, I don't have the effort or energy to deal with humans. It's like easier to deal with a dog because there's no like leftover baggage from the past. I mean, it's like usually even if they're naughty on occasion, like if they had an accident in the house, it's like I don't hold that against them, and there's so many more positive memories that outweigh the negative ones. But yeah, with animals, it's just like it's like unconditional love. Like whereas human interactions can sometimes be conditional, or there's like this give and take, and it's just like, I mean, these boys are all taken too, but it's like you have no expectation of them being like, well, you didn't respond in the way that made me feel better, kind of thing, or you said that inappropriately, or whatever. A dog is a dog, and you can kind of like be clear with your expectations of what you would get from a dog, essentially, versus humans can be a little different.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So tell me if I'm tracking right, but it kind of sounds like you're able to develop a relationship that is still meaningful, like in the same way that like having relationships with people is meaningful,
Yeah.
but a lot simpler, like a lot less I don't know, social construction, right? Like there's like when you're interacting with other people, it gets complicated fast. There's a lot of I guess rules is not necessarily the right word, but a lot of just like nuances and intricacies and like things that make a big difference. And with a pet, it makes sense to me that it'd be easier to sort of like you said, develop sort of an unconditional love or bond, which, I think a lot of us want with other people, but it doesn't always work out that way.
Right.
Like you said, expectations come in, but like with your pets, you probably have a better idea of what to expect, or at least violations of your expectations that are like within a defined boundary. Like your pet can't go out and spend all your money on a new car that you don't want, or like,
Right.
make some of these decisions that make things complicated. So that makes sense to me how it would be just like a nice, more simple relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, it's much more straightforward, and it's like, they have pretty basic needs that are like, yeah, walking them, feeding them, letting them pee and poo, essentially, giving them some pets and snuggles, and they're pretty happy. And that's the other thing. It's like it's easy to make them happy, like taking them to the park. It's like, or a walk. They're just like ecstatic, versus like a human. It's like, yeah, sometimes those help. Actually, it's there's so many more layers when it comes to dealing with humans. Yes.
On another sort of related note, I would be curious what your experience has been, if you've had any, in terms of like, I guess it would be dog owner as part of a group, right? Like, do you feel like you meet enough people or like interact with enough people that having that as part of your identity is helpful for a sense of community, or like that doesn't really factor in?
Um, yeah, I think it does. I was just talking to my partner the other day about we were just watching a show, and one of this couple, and one person was like, "Oh, dogs, ew, pew." Like, and we were like, yeah, if neither of us were a dog person, I don't think we'd be together essentially. Or if there was like a partner that wanted to have us get rid of our dogs for the sake of the relationship, I would absolutely pick my dogs over that relationship. But yeah, even when we're like meeting other dog owners, like at the park or just happenstance, from day to day, it's like, okay, well, there's a commonality. It's like you get what you're dealing with, like, and there's so many personalities out there. Like I had a friend, actually, we just went out for my birthday dinner a few weeks ago, and she just got a new puppy who was very challenging. And I was like, man, I can relate, because I remember the puppy phase. My boys are about three years old now for both of them. So it's just like that commonality can just help connect you, especially if you're out there dating and you're meeting new people and you both like love dogs. It's a good starting point, because it's like something that you care and love. I guess that could go with any hobby, essentially. It's like, let's say you both love snowboarding with a passion, then yeah, that's something you can share in that common interest. But dogs is like, definitely, like, there's a gang of dog owners that just like get you.
I want to cue on something you mentioned about like your friend getting a puppy was kind of a pain.
Yeah.
I'd be curious what you think are the necessary, or like, where does someone need to be to consider getting a pet, right? Because sometimes, you you hear stories of people like, oh, I got this dog, I had it for 3 weeks or a month or whatever, and like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm getting rid of this thing. And then in like the worst cases, you hear of like abuse or just dropping them off in the middle of nowhere, or like whatever else. So I'm curious what you think people need to have, either like emotionally, financially, whatever, to be prepared for having a pet.
Yeah, I am absolutely one of those people that believe, people shouldn't just get pets as gifts. Like, you don't just give someone a puppy as like a present for Christmas, because that is a huge responsibility that will last you 10 to 15 years. It's like not everyone is ready for that type of commitment. And it's like you can't just get a dog because it's cute. You have to like actually, have a stable living situation. Does the environment you live in, do they allow pets? That's important. If you're sneaking a pet in and out, that's gonna you're gonna be caught pretty soon, pretty much. Or if you're living with someone that's kind of like hates them or is allergic to them, that could also be another issue. So living situation is important, but also time. Like my partner had, like, when he was living in DC, or when we were both living on the East Coast, he was working like 12-hour days, and he decided to get a German Shepherd dog, which is a highly active, who needs a lot of energy, like needs like constant activity. And that's the other thing. It's like you have to factor in the type of dog that would fit your lifestyle is important. Like there's tons of shepherds and huskies and shelters, but not everyone is cut out to handle it. They're very loving and cuddly, but it's like, if you don't have like 2 hours a day to like dedicate to them and their activity, then that might not be the best fit for you. Versus like this little Chihuahua. I mean, he's super active and he loves to run around, but he can also be a very chill lap pup. So, but he does need to be let out. Initially when we first got him, it was like every 4 to 4 hours or so, but now he's like, he can go like 8 hours or so. He can last all night without a potty break. But yeah, that's the other thing. It's like, what's your environment? Do you have a yard? Are you set up? Are you willing to spend the time to train them, or pay someone to train them for you? And even if you pay someone to train them, are you willing to reinforce the training they got? Otherwise, it's just out the window and wasting money. That's another factor that you have to think about. It's like, are you a responsible person and are going to remember to like feed them and walk them and give them the attention they need? Because this is a living being that needs a lot of love and attention. They're, especially in the early days, they need a lot more. Now he's a little more independent, that he can just be on his own and fine for several hours. But otherwise, it's like, if you don't have the time and the commitment and the finances or the emotional resources to support your pets, then it's probably not the best fit. Maybe it's maybe you need a cat. Cats are easier. They can be left alone a little bit longer. They don't need to be walked. Essentially, they can be left. They still need love and cuddles, but they don't need to be let outside to go potty.
I was gonna say the cat here, yeah, I might not have to let her outside, but when she's needy, she is needy. Oh my God. The last week or two, whenever I try to work, she has been jumping into my lap and just walking in circles on my lap. And I'm like, okay, I need to write some software. Like I need to type.
Right. Yeah.
But I get what you're saying. Like, yeah. So let me try to recap again what you're saying, which is like, if you are planning on getting a pet, you need to pay attention to the type of pet, because it matters a lot what you actually get and what your actual resources and constraints are. It reminds me of my brother has a dog. He's had him for a long time, but recently got a new job where he has to work like crazy long hours. He's telling me he's feeling really bad and having a hard time because his dog's just at home hanging out alone all day, and like nothing crazy bad is happening, but it's clear whenever he gets home that it's like, oh man, this guy's been lonely all day.
Right.
So
it's super hyper probably and amped up.
I think it is really important for people to like not take the decision to get a pet lightly. I think sometimes people do.
Yeah.
And at the very least, if you feel like you're not up to it once you have one, finding a good alternative to where you're at, because I just like I said, I'm not explicitly a pet person in the terms of like, oh, I want to have a ton of pets, but it absolutely makes me feel like really sad when I see or hear about like a box of kittens left in the middle of a park, or like whatever thing it is where the person just didn't make an effort to sort of take care of or find a good home for animals that they may not want anymore.
Yeah, that's always a sad situation, especially when it's like I see pets kind of just being returned to the shelter because, they just were not prepared, like, or they didn't realize what having a pet involves. And I forgot to like touch on like something you mentioned of like the time period of like how long do you wait before, because there is an adjustment period, especially if I highly recommend getting pets from shelters. Because there's already way too many cats and dogs out there. So there's plenty of puppies and kitties that need to be rescued, which is what we did. But it's like there is an adjustment period. It could be a few weeks. It could be a few months, maybe a few years for some pets. And, I'd say give it at least 3 or 4 months before you decide this is not the pet for me. Because, especially if they were like strays at one point, they have a lot of fear and other issue, or they came from an abusive household. It's like they kind of have to settle into their environment, which might take a little while before they kind of get used to their routine. And routine is everything. And if you're not able to provide a clear routine, then it's like, yeah, that's just encouraging more bad behavior or more accidents. Essentially, it's like their potty schedule is pretty routine now, so they don't have accidents anymore, which is nice. But yeah, that's something you have to kind of put up with my bigger one. He is actually house trained since we got him at 5 months. I was like trying to think of some of his issues. Probably getting along with other dogs sometimes could be his thing. He's not super needy at all. No, not at all. But yeah, what Jax was like when we first got him was that he was 5 months, Shepherd, Husky, Pit, Doberman mix. And he was like bouncing off the walls, hyper like energy. And we were like, oh my God. And puppies need to sleep too. They play hard, but they sleep hard. But he was like not even napping. We were like losing our minds. But, after a few months, he started to be like, okay, well, I don't need to be playing all the time. And so he's much more chill now that he's 3, but he can still play really hard if there's other dogs or an opportunity to play or run around. But he can be very chill too. So it's like, give them some time to kind of settle into their environment. They might calm down or they might not. So that's something for you to figure out.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, even if it's not negative, right? There's going to be an adjustment period no matter what. Like,
Mhm.
I feel like as a pet, they have to get used to their new home and new, like, you're probably going to have certain expectations, and it's going to take time for you to sort of like communicate them out in some way. So having an idea or like the expectation that there will be an adjustment period, even if you get lucky and they're super well behaved,
Yeah.
I think I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, that'll make it a lot easier. I would be curious, on a different note, what you did either to prepare or to learn as you got your pets. So, and to color that in a little bit,
Mhm.
with the cat that we have now, like, one time I was petting her and she scratched me like bad,
Mm,
and I was like,
yeah.
"What in the world just happened?" So I went and
Mhm.
did some research online, and it was like, yeah, you're not supposed to like. A lot of cats don't like their belly rubbed. Like, don't do
Mhm.
that. It's
Yeah.
super exposed and vulnerable for them, and it makes them feel like very uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Anyway, I feel like I've been just sort of like
Mhm.
learning things as I go, but I'd be curious what your trajectory has been.
Yeah, definitely there's a learning curve, and it's also, with this one, he was like super super shy at first, and initially he I mean, he got attached to me really quickly, but with other people he was just very nervous, and he even like it was funny because it's like Jack's my bigger one. My mom was initially afraid of him because he's a bigger dog. He's not like a super big dog for 50 pounds, but he's a bigger dog. And so she was nervous about him biting her, but it ended up being him, a little chihuahua biting her because he was just the more nervous one and anxious about being around new people. But now he loves her because she sometimes spoils him. But it takes time to adjust and for them to warm up to people. And I've heard of many pets, like maybe more so dogs, but like I know of, like, especially if they've had like a history of trauma, that they might be more guarded or more aggressive with male humans than female for whatever reason. um I haven't seen it too much the other way around, but it definitely can happen. So it's like, having patience for that, or just kind of doing a slow introduction, or not like forcing the connection to build, like with a human. You don't want to like force a connection to be built. It happens over time and exposure and building of that trust. And over time, he, develops trust, and he's much more confident even with strangers now, although he's sometimes a little nervous. He'll just kind of like sniff and then run away real quick, but he's definitely doing a lot better with other people.
I think you touched on a couple important points, one of which is all the pets that I've run into all sort of have different personalities to a
Yeah.
degree.
Hmm.
And that makes a big difference in terms of how they respond when they're treated certain ways.
Yeah.
And the other thing you touched on is, I think, the history of the animal is really important,
Hmm.
because my brother, again, that same dog, came from a very abusive
Hmm.
situation,
Yeah.
and he actually ended up like attacking my sister's boyfriend at the time during Christmas one
Oh,
of the
oh
years,
no. Yeah.
and sent him to the hospital for
Oh
Christmas.
gosh.
So
Yeah.
that was fun. But like, if we didn't have a picture of the history,
Hmm. Hmm.
then we wouldn't really have understood at all what happened. And it still
Right.
wasn't a good situation at all, and like not awesome, and there was a lot of problems and consequences. But like, at least we had, it wasn't completely out of the blue. It wasn't like
Yeah.
well, this dog's just crazy, like, got
Right.
to get rid of him. It was like something in that interaction triggered this dog based on its past,
Hmm.
and unfortunately, this was the outcome. Um, but all that to say that, like, there's not. I don't think it's wise to take a generic approach to every pet of the same type.
Yeah.
And just in the same way that it's, there's some decent rules of thumb for interacting with people, but
Mhm.
you also need to really pay attention to the individual and
Yeah.
their differences in history and stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. It makes the difference. All right. Were there any other questions you had about pets, or any final thoughts you had about having pets and happiness?
Here's one other sort of specific question, but I would be curious how much people need to set aside, and I don't know, maybe I haven't run into this yet, in
Mm,
case of sort of emergency problems, right? Because
mm,
like
mhm.
I feel like it'd be horrible to have your pet,
Yeah,
everything's going well, they're well behaved, you got them trained the way you want, whatever, and then you go to the vet and the bill is question mark amount of money, and you're like, oh, this sucks. I have no idea what that question mark will be, so I'd be curious what you think is like a safe amount to set aside if you've even dealt with that yet.
that's thankfully our boys are pretty healthy, so we haven't had a huge. I mean the regular checkup bills not not cheap either. Like for two dogs, it's like for their annual checkup, it was like $700 or $800 for both of them. Which was a hefty, but they had like nothing wrong with them. So if there was something wrong with them, like I actually had a client who had a dog who had, I think, like leukemia or something. And so it was like thousands of dollars of testing for just the diagnosis, and then like other stuff. So it can really add up easily. One thing, if you have like because my boys are mixes, so they generally are healthier than purebreds, which is another reason why I encourage people to get their pets from shelters. Rescue pups, because purebreds tend to have more problems. Like my friend has a Frenchie, and they are notoriously known to have health problems. So in that case, if you do have a breed that is notorious for having health problems, I'd recommend getting health pet insurance for them, because then it might be worthwhile, because she actually did get pet insurance, actually, thankfully, a few months before there was like a major knee issue for her dog that would end up costing them thousands of dollars. But thankfully they had the pet insurance, so that kind of covered a big chunk of that. So we don't. So I'm a little nervous. But I think, maybe setting aside at least a few grand, and you have to kind of determine, depending on the age of the pet, and I guess how important they are to you, is kind of how, or your financial situation or yourself, is kind of what you can determine for your budget. But that could be different for each individual, because it's like, if it was towards, because my boys are 3, and so they still have plenty of life left. But if they were like 13, both of them, that might, I might question, I would be devastated. It's like, I think you kind of have to set a budget limit of being like, how much are we willing to spend to extend their life a little bit longer? And is it really going to be worth it if it's only like a few months to spend thousands of dollars? So it's kind of like you have to weigh the pros and cons and your finances, and get input from any co-owners of the pet to determine what's best.
Yeah, I think that helps, just because I have heard, through the grapevine, a couple stories of people who had budgeted for a pet, but what they
Yeah.
had budgeted for was all of the regular expenses,
Right.
like, oh yeah, I can feed them. Oh, I can,
Yeah.
whatever else, just these baseline expenses. And then a couple health problems came through and they were not prepared at all. So
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Can add up. All right, well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this week. If you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.